Round 5 of the London Chess Classic went on pretty late last night. Well, we'll see the reasons why in a second, but first of all, I want to take you through the game between Michael Adams and Vachier Topalov. Toppy not having a great tournament so far, just lost a couple of games. Michael Adams also lost his first 2 rounds, although picked up a little bit in the last 2 rounds with a couple of draws. But still, this is a battle of the bottom 2 players in the tournament. And as you can see, it's a Berlin, but Mickey has kept the tension by playing pawn to d3, so not going into the Berlin endgame. And this is a pretty well-known position, played by many players, well-known system that White is playing. So it has the slightly better pawn structure. Sometimes you cast the queen side, sometimes king side, and, well, depending on how black plays, White has various pawn breaks. So you might recall a game between Wei Yi and David Navarra from Vachier-Lagrave almost a year ago, which went like this, and Wei Yi won a spectacular game like this, and he castled queen side and sacrificed pieces on the king side. Beautiful game. So that follows after black castles here, but bishop e6 prevents this move knight c4, so White can't castle queenside so easily. And now White still can't take on e5 because of queen d4 with a double attack. So White castles kingside, and Mickey was playing these moves very quickly. So now this is a threat, so the bishop comes back to defend. And here Adams previously has played b3. He played this, for example, against Giri in a Bundesliga game, but didn't get much advantage in this position. Today he tried d4, and other players have tried this as well. So obviously if this is taken, then e5 wins a piece, so knight d7 bolsters the e5 point. And now White trades everything on e5 and gets this nice pawn duo moving up the board. But black does have the 2 bishops. Check. King goes in the corner. And now last year in the London Chess Classic, in a game between Caruana and Grishuk, Grishuk blocked this f-pawn with f5. And, well, in this position, Caruana was, with his passed e-pawn, was very slightly better. And that advantage persisted, and the game ended in a draw, but perhaps he could have made something from it. Well, that's a very Mickey type position, you know. Adams loves to play with a slight advantage and using his fine positional technique. But that's not really Topalov's style, to sit and suffer. He prefers a more open game. So he played pawn to f6. And Adams, as he said after the game, had prepared this line. He prepared a pawn sacrifice with e5, and this is very attractive. Now clearly this pawn can't be allowed to advance again, so that gets taken. And now the queen shoots out to g4, hitting the g7 pawn, and if black castles, then knight e4, and White has a beautiful position. So the knight finds a wonderful square. The bishop is ready to join in the attack here. Don't forget the f-pawn. The rook might come over as well to one of these squares. Very nice attacking position. Topalov thought for almost 35 minutes in this position. He does not like to defend. That wouldn't be his style at all, to play castles kingside. Instead he played more actively. He played queen d3, which seems like a very appealing move in some ways, because the queen looks at the rook, so the knight can't move. But of course it does allow queen takes g7, and now it's all kicking off. So rook attacked, pawn attacked. The rook has to move it. If castle's queenside, then White can simply take the bishop. So rook g8 Queen takes e5 check, so now the king is displaced. If king f8, then b3 is a very nice move with the idea bishop a3 check, and it's hard for black to wriggle free from that one. King d7 is certainly the best move. And now suddenly, if black can connect the rooks, bring the king to safety, the initiative has completely swung over to black, and white, with his poor development on the queen side, would be worse. So white needs to play quite precisely here, and Mickey played queen e4. Now, they've played 19 moves, and Mickey, well, confessed is too strong a word, but Mickey made it known that he'd actually prepared this position at some point. And here, queen d5, apparently, according to Mickey, is the best move. But in this case, there's no doubt that white would be better in these endgames. So at the moment, you can see very nice 3-1 pawn majority on the king side. And after bishop takes pawn, white has a pleasant choice between knight f6 check and rook d1. Both lead to a slightly better endgame for white. It's just, you take your pick. But, I can sort of understand, well, given his personality and his style, why Topalov didn't wish to do that. He doesn't like to fall into positions where he's simply worse without any chance of winning. Not his style at all. He prefers to keep tension in the position. And he played queen a6, which looks a really ugly move, going right into the corner of the board, but it's actually not so simple. f6 played by Adams after 23 minutes. It's a very tricky position. So the rook comes across, hits the queen, and now check. Now clearly if the bishop interposes, then at some point there's going to be f7. Well, in fact, straight away, queen takes followed by f7. So the king drops back to d8. Now this is black's problem, that the king is actually prevented from running to the queen side. So the king is in huge trouble, and c4 really cements black's difficulties, takes away the d5 square from the bishop, cuts the queen out of play. And here, well, yes, bishop takes pawn. This loses immediately to f7. So after about 15 minutes thought, Topalov came up with queen a5. Now the ending isn't quite as clear as one would wish. So Adams ducked back with queen h3. So this means that the king is still prevented from running from the center. And now queen b4. And here, well, I was commentating on this position at the venue, and we were looking for very quick ways just to bring these pieces into the attack, and we thought that knight f3 was a very strong move, and this is certainly confirmed by computer analysis afterwards. So very simple, we just want to well, for example, bring a rook to d1, giving a massive check here, and if queen c4, then check, and now just f7, and that's very nasty indeed, and this is coming very soon as well, so black is utterly lost. Mickey said afterwards he was worried about something like bishop e6. He thought this might be a little bit tricky. If it goes wrong for white, then black does have counterplays, so he was being very careful. In fact, it does look as though this is simply very good for white after queen takes and, for example, bishop takes and bishop g5. But it's very hard to determine this in a game where one false move and suddenly black has a very strong counter-attack. Instead, he played queen takes h7, which is quite a brave move in some ways, because it opens up the h-file and you never know, there could be some counter-attack there. But it's safe enough. First of all, he's hitting the bishop and the queen came back, and now he played b3 to protect that pawn on c4 so that he can move the knight. So in some ways this is a very positionally responsible way to play the position. He just wants to keep this bishop on f7 shut out of the game. And the game went bishop d4, queen d3. I mean, Topalov certainly doesn't have anything better than this. Now knight e4. Now, again, very typical of Topalov's style. He could take this knight and go into a worse endgame after this, for example. Now, rook g4. If the queen moves here, for example, then there's queen e7, queen takes f7. So rook g4, and now this endgame is obviously better for white. White is 2 pawns up, 3 connected pass pawns on the king's side, but actually after rook e2, it's not that simple for white to win this position. If this bishop can just run around to e4, for example, it's still a bit tricky, and the king is, a good blockader. But typically, Topalov doesn't want to play some worse endgame. He would rather maintain the tension and, hope that something turns up in the complications. So he played queen d7, but this, I'm afraid, was fatal. He really is utterly lost now after this. And bishop g5, yep, stops the mate on g2. And now white's queen goes the other way, threatening mate. Bishop d5, only move, but this is now winning check and just taking off the rook. So here, if pawn takes, then queen takes g8, and white is a piece up, and something very nasty is going to happen here as well, and the rook will come into the game, and the attack, black's attack, is gone. So Mickey got there in the end. Very complex game, but I just think it's interesting how Topalov never wants to compromise, and ultimately, he paid the price there. So he now has half out of 5 in the tournament. Tough times for him, but Mickey bounces back up, so that's good for him. So why did the round go on for so long? Well, let me find the game between Nakamura and Kramnik, which did last till just over 60 moves. Hikaru has been squeezing very nicely in this position. You can see that he has a very nice space advantage, and this knight is hitting the pawn on g5, and this queen is swinging over to restrict the knight and maybe enter into black's position around here, and he's perhaps hoping to hit these weak pawns. So Kramnik with black under pressure here, but he defended so coolly here with brilliant calculation, actually. And what now follows, he had calculated right to the end, which is brilliant. So queen e4, knight g5, hitting this pawn, so queen takes, obviously not possible. Queen e1 check. King goes up the board. Now black does not have a perpetual check here. If queen d2, the queen comes back and the king slips back, and the king is completely safe here. So queen f2 check, but now knight f3, and the knight does a fantastic job of covering the king. These crucial squares are protected, and d4 as well. So now it's going to be white's turn to bat. So the knight has to come back, the queen comes in. So for the moment, black is holding firm with the king and knight. However, if the king comes up the board to protect the e-pawn, then g5, using his extra pawn, and g6 is threatened, and this is going to be the end. So for example, queen c2 covering g6, but then g6 check, and knight g5, the king moves away, and e6 drops. So for the moment, it looked as though Hikaru had made significant progress, but Vlad had it under control. Knight g6 check, the king came up, queen takes knight, and now if king takes knight, then black is still fine after check, and it's going to be, well, if king there, then it's actually checkmate, but king here will simply lead to a draw. So instead, one last roll of the dice from Nakamura. He took on e6, and this is still very tricky. If the knight goes back, the knight now threatened, of course, if the knight goes back to e7, then queen f6 wins for white. King here, and the pawn is going to go through. The g-pawn goes through. So there's only one move to draw for black, knight h8. Incredibly good calculation from Kramnik. Queen f5 check. King goes in, and now, because of the threat here, black has to exchange. And this is still a draw, incredibly, because there's a nice trick. So the knight prevents the king coming over here. e6 only possible try, and now the key move, knight f7, and it's the only move to draw, but quite good enough. Obviously if it's taken, it's stalemate. Hikaru tried king g6, but there's nothing doing here, and after this he decided to call it a night, and that was a draw. Brilliant defense from Vladimir Kramnik. So after 5 rounds, the leader is still Wesley So with 3.5 out of 5, and then there's a big chasing pack, and Vachier Topalov at the bottom with 0.5 out of 5. Today, Wednesday, is a rest day in London, and after that they play the final 4 games.